Hello, my name is Gabby Smith, and here is my infographic for our Module 2 digital mini project. And I chose to focus on the technology integration planning cycle, which was put forth by Hutchinson and Woodward in their 2014 article. So in my infographic, I laid out the steps that were mentioned in the article of what they felt were most important to consider when trying to integrate technology into a lesson that you are planning. Their first step that they identified was that you have to identify a learning goal. That's necessary for any lesson that you are creating, and therefore it's integral to their planning cycle. The second step is to consider what instructional approach or pedagogy will you be considering or will you be employing in this lesson. So an example of these pedagogies, as given in an article that I have listed in the resources, is instructivist, which is teacher-centered, or constructivist, which is student-centered. So what method will you be utilizing as you are working through your lesson? The third step that they mention is selecting a digital or non-digital tool. Um, for the purpose of this infographic, and since we're talking about integrating technology into lessons, I chose to focus on the digital tool selection. And I looked up simply what tools are teachers using, what digital tools are teachers using in the classroom. And I found an article by the ASU Prep Global, which was actually released this year in 2024. And they had a list of several different tools that they found that, or that teachers said that they're using. And in fact, there is even a statistic on that site that said 85% of teachers are using digital tools in their classroom. And they note that it's a necessity and not a luxury. It's something that we have to consider when we are working and creating our lessons. So I thought that was interesting. But some of the ones that were mentioned were Kahoot, Padlet, and Flipgrid, among a couple of others. But I noticed that a lot of the tools that were listed were either like quiz based or preparing for a quiz, right? Like quiz practice, or it was like Kahoot is a game-based quiz, or it was collaborative. So like Padlet, right, is a place where everyone can view each other's answers. They answer certain questions and they can collaborate there. And Flipgrid is a tool, a video recording tool. And so that can be used a couple of different ways, right? That can be used individually or it could be used collectively with the group. So I thought that was interesting. And then also number 4 is you have to consider how the digital tool helps to meet the instructional goal. I found this to be incredibly profound, something that I had not considered before. And I think for a lot of educators, we're told to pick a digital tool that will work for our lesson, but it has never, the connection has never been made to me that it has to meet the instructional goal, which I think you think about naturally on your own, but it's not anything that's been explicitly told to me. So I thought that was a really important piece from this article. But if we come down to this box that talks about steps 3 and 4, which is selecting the tool and how the tool meets the goal, Hutchinson and Woodward note that choosing an appropriate digital or non-digital tool is extremely important. And then you have to determine how the tool, if and how the tool helps students to meet their original learning goal identified at the beginning of the cycle. If the tool is not enhancing students' learning to help them meet that learning goal, then perhaps it is not the correct digital tool for your lesson. That's okay. That's why they have the option of a non-digital tool. Sometimes a non-digital tool is the tool that you need for your lesson. Looking at number 5, you have to think of the constraints of the tool selected. And Hutchinson and Woodward describe this as like, what barriers are you going to come across, right? Perhaps it's maybe students have never worked with that digital tool before. And so you have to put time into your lesson to teach them the basics. And does that mean that it's going to completely take away from the learning goal, or is that tool still viable enough to help students reach that goal? That was put forward by Hutchinson and Woodward. And then I3 Technologies discussed that constraints of integrating technology into the classroom could include that, like students have a hard time using the technology or are uncomfortable with the technology, right? Or it could be that teachers are having a hard time aligning the technology with their pedagogy, which I think really goes nicely with step number 4, right? We need to understand how the tool helps meet the instructional goal. And if we're having a hard time finding that, maybe it's not the correct tool. And then looking at step number 6, it's saying how will instruction change based on the tool selected. So after you've selected a tool and you've confirmed that it meets the goal, it helps get to the identified learning goal at the beginning of the cycle, what changes do you have to make to your instruction, right? Perhaps you have to take more of a constructivist point of view instead of an instructivist, or maybe you have to, if you're all constructivist all the time, maybe you have to pull back and be instructivist and be teacher centered to teach them the basics of the tool when you had not previously considered that. So that's a great opportunity for you to tweak your lesson before you give it. And then step 7 is to instruct and reflect. Instruct obviously is giving the lesson. And then Hutchinson and Woodward again, and it's mentioned down here, assert that reflection is an important part of this process, that teachers need to actively take part in. And we've heard this before, right? Educators are always told you should be reflecting on your lessons and on your practices in order to make sure that you are giving the best learning experience to your students. And so this is no different. They're saying that you should reflect on your process. And then I found a website, Roots and Wings, which is also noted in the resources, has a list of 5 different reflection tools that teachers can utilize. I have found that some teachers naturally reflect all the time, and most teachers do, but others need to be prompted to think about specific things in their lesson that they should be looking at. And I found that there were several very good tools on that website that teachers could use for reflection. And then it starts all over again. You go to your next lesson, taking your reflections and taking everything that you have learned in this cycle to create a new lesson and integrate technology into your lesson once more. That is my explanation for my infographic for our Module 2 digital mini project. Thank you so much for listening and following along.